How we doing today, friends? Waiting for the system to let me know that we are live. And we are live. Welcome back to another Metabolic Monday. Today, we're going to talk about specific nutritional needs for those that are on vegan or vegetarian diets when it comes to mental health and mental well-being. I want to share with you some data that hitherto has not really been talked about with regards to the plant-based diet push that is being foisted upon a lot of us in society, even our own health institutions like the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics, including the American Heart Association. Many institutions are promoting a plant-based vegan diet, but there are specific nutritional considerations and possible downsides, health consequences linked with going on a vegan or vegetarian diet, specifically with regards to mental health and mental well-being. Now, I want to share with you a little bit of the data, what the research shows. That's what we like to do on this channel. This is not sensation. This is not hyperbole. We like to look at peer-reviewed studies and distill them down to you in actionable sound bites. So if you're enjoying this content at any time, please hit that like button. Let me know what you think in the chat and the comment section below. Also, I'd be honored if you could share this with a friend or family member who may benefit from this information. And since you're here live, I would love to know where you're from as well. We have some folks here from there was a commenter from Canada. We have some folks from Texas in the house. So again, thanks for being here and thanks for hitting that like button. Let's dive right into it. So, what inspired this conversation for me? Well, every now and again, there are activists that are promoting a vegan diet that are seemingly doing irrational things, such as pouring milk out in grocery stores, dressing up with fake blood on them and the like. And that got me thinking, I wonder if there's a connection between a meatless diet, a vegan diet, and mental health challenges, because I would be shocked if an omnivorous person was at a grocery store throwing broccoli across the place or taking carrots and breaking them and throwing them around. That would be shocking to me if an omnivore was doing that or a carnivore was doing that. You don't see that type of behavior, but you do see that often with vegan activists is, throwing meat around, burning stuff, pretending to be dead and the like. And so I just got to wondering, is there any scientific evidence to suggest that going on a vegan diet may compromise metabolic health? And I was actually shocked to find that there was a large dossier of literature showing that individuals who go on meatless diets are at risk, particularly for anxiety and depression. That's what we're going to focus on here. Not necessarily schizophrenia, bipolar disorder, or other disorders, but anxiety and depression are common co-occurrences in individuals who are on a vegan or vegetarian diet. Now, you might be saying, well, they maybe went on the diet because of the fact that they had anxiety and depression in the first place. And you might say, well, that could be, sort of a healthy user bias or a bias in the inclusion criteria of the studies. But several studies have actually done cluster analysis of clinical trials and have statistically continually found that there is a strong association or co-occurrence in individuals who adhere to a vegan or vegetarian diet with mental health issues. And I want to share with you some of that data. While I'm diving into that, keep this figure in mind. From a study of 4,181 results, if you look here at anxiety disorder, if you look at individuals who have been on a vegetarian diet or a semi-vegetarian diet, the prevalence of anxiety is almost twofold compared to non-vegetarian individuals. Now, again, this was a German study in 4,000 subjects. If you look at depressive disorder, the prevalence between omnivorous dieters compared to vegetarian vegan dieters is almost 17% higher prevalence of depression. Again, this is in 4,100 subjects. And I want to share with you the analysis of this particular study as well. Okay, so let's dive into this. Again, if you're enjoying the content, hit that like button. That goes a long way. The scientists say the majority of studies, and especially the higher quality studies, showed that in those who avoided meat consumption, that they had significantly higher rates of and risk of depression and anxiety and or self-harm behaviors. There was mixed evidence for temporal relations, but study designs and a lack of rigor precluded inferences as causal relations. Our study does not support that meat avoidance is a strategy to benefit psychological health. That's specifically what we're talking about here. I know people go, there's a lot of reasons why people avoid meat in their diet, most of which is compassion towards animals. And I wholeheartedly understand and agree with that. I'm not a fan of feedlot-derived animals. I personally don't eat a lot of pork because I know how pork is processed. I know how intelligent pigs are, and I've actually had pigs myself, so I avoid pork myself. But having pasture-raised, grass-fed cattle from locally grown ranchers who are minimizing pre-slaughter stress, I think from a dietary, nutritional, peace of mind standpoint, there are a lot of micronutrients that are specifically present in an omnivorous diet. And so again, mental health is a challenge, is a consequence or a potential health risk when it comes to a vegan vegetarian diet because of the different nutritional deficiencies, which require more nuance and more strategic and planning when it comes to eating a vegetarian or vegan diet. As you can see here from this paper by Cordain and O'Keefe et al., some of the health risks associated with going on a vegan diet are anxiety, depression. You have hair loss, dermatitis and skin issues, anemia due to iron deficiencies, B12 deficiencies. And my particular bias here, sarcopenia, loss of muscle mass. I think that is a prominent feature that you see out in public. People that have been on a vegan vegetarian diet for any length of time generally don't have the same quality and quantity of muscle mass compared to omnivorous dieters. Also, and certainly not last, but or at least the osteoporosis and bone fractures, because an omnivorous diet is going to have collagen, cartilaginous material. You're going to have micronutrients that are good for synthesizing, and helping support bone and joint health. I know a lot of people complain of joint pain. In fact, Rich Roll recently did an episode with Dr. Peter Attia, and he's in his 50s and he can barely ride his bike. And he's been a prominent vegan promoter and activist and athlete for a long time. And he's having a lot of musculoskeletal and joint pain. And so I think it is important to recognize, because the third leading cause of mortality here in the US was unintentional injuries related to suicides and drug overdoses. So clearly here in the US, we have a mental health problem. And if there is a nutritional element that could help improve mental health and reduce self-harm or inclination to engage in illicit drug use, that would be helpful. Wouldn't it be helpful to say, hey, look, if you could improve, even if you want to do a vegan vegetarian diet, you should consider zinc, you should consider iodine, omega-3 fats, you should consider vitamin K2, creatine, taurine. There's conditionally essential and essential nutrients that might avert the mental health challenges that some people experience when they go on meatless diets. And so there should be adequate recommendations from a nutritional supplement standpoint. So let's further dive into that and then also talk about data on creatine. This particular study I think is quite interesting, and this was a study in Brazil. This study involved 14,000 Brazilians, and this was a cross-sectional analysis that was performed with baseline data of the ELSA Brazil cohort, which included 14,216 Brazilians between the ages of 35 and 74. A meatless diet was defined as a validated food frequency questionnaire. Now, we do know that these are inherently inaccurate. I guess the only sort of upside here is it's really easy to say you don't eat meat and you do eat meat. I mean, very simple. I think the problem comes in with these food frequency questionnaires where people say, well, I have red meat, and that might include processed red meat. And it's hard for people to differentiate, meatloaf bought from the grocery store in the frozen section from, grass-fed beef or ground beef or something of the effect. And so the only sort of thing that you need to consider is there is limitations with food frequency questionnaires, and I totally acknowledge that. But this particular association found that meatless diets and the co-occurrence of depression episodes was expressed as a prevalence ratio determined by regression adjustment analysis. And what they found is that there was depressive episodes are more prevalent in individuals who do not eat meat, independently of socioeconomic and lifestyle factors. Nutrient deficiencies do not explain this association, they say. The nature of the association remains unclear. Longitudinal data are needed to clarify this causal relationship. So again, I just think it's important that we acknowledge and recognize that certain diets have limitations. Even people that go on a carnivore diet, they might have limitations because they're not having fermented foods potentially in the diet, because they're avoiding vegetables at all costs and the like. So I think that's important to recognize. But there is a sort of baffling connection between veganism and depression. Let's talk about another study. Here in Great Britain, there was 9,668 men who were partners of pregnant women who took what's known as the Edinburgh Postnatal Depressive Scale. 7% of the vegetarians obtained scores indicating severe depression, compared to just 4% of non-vegetarians. So you look at almost a doubling in the rates of depression. There was another study in 2018 involving 90,000 adults, and French researchers examined the impact of giving up various food groups on depressive symptoms among meat eaters, vegans, true vegetarians, and vegetarians who ate fish. The incidence of depression increased with each food group that was given up. People had given up three or four animal-related food groups, red meat, poultry, fish, and dairy, were nearly 2.5 times at a greater risk for suffering from depression. So again, why might that be? Well, it turns out that creatine is really important, and we're going to talk about all the different micronutrients here, but I just want you to maybe take a screenshot of this here, the health risks of a vegan diet. This should be shared with our vegan friends because we want the best for them, right? We want them to be healthy and not have anxiety, depression, mental health issues, and the like. And so I do just want to quickly remind you that exercise is very important for mental health. Exercise is also very important for all sorts of blood sugar related aspects. And one nutrient that not enough people are getting, even if you eat a pound of meat per day, you're only getting 2 grams of creatine per day, which is the bare minimum recommended dose. So the novel creatine-containing electrolyte 6 by Myoscience contains not only 2.5 grams of creatine, but also real salt. So that is getting you the sodium from red mineral salt. You're also getting albion-chelated minerals. You're getting potassium. You're getting taurine, some nutrients that work wonderfully if you are exercising. Pre-workout, intra-workout, post-workout. I will link that below. It's one of the only creatine-containing electrolyte products on the market. So very unique product, pairing both creatine and electrolytes with real salt. Save with the code podcast at checkout. Okay. Let's talk a little bit more about some research from Australia. Austria. So in 2014, Austrian researchers published an elegant study of individuals who varied in their diets, 330 vegetarians, 330 people who consumed a lot of meat, 330 omnivorous individuals who ate less meat and more whole foods, from plants and whatnot, and 330 people who consumed little meat, but mostly fruit and veggies. The subjects were matched for sex, age, and socioeconomic status. The vegetarians were about twice as likely than other groups to suffer from mental illnesses such as anxiety and depression. There was yet another study involving 140 women that found that the odds of depression were twice as great in women consuming less than the recommended intake of meat per week. The researchers also found that women eating more than the recommended amounts were also less likely to be depressed. The studies go on and on and on, and there was yet another study here talking about creatine. This particular study, I think, is quite fascinating. This was actually published in Translational Psychiatry. The title of this paper is Dietary Creatine Intake and Depression Risk Amongst U.S. Adults. And so why would researchers be interested in studying creatine? Well, creatine is only found in animal products. And so when trying to disentangle mechanisms of a meatless diet as it's associated with an increased risk for anxiety specifically and also depression, it would be nice to know which specific micronutrients might be causing or leaning one's biology to feel symptoms of anxiousness and depression. And creatine is one nutrient that's been purported to be deficient in a vegan vegetarian diet that might be linked with increased risk for anxiety and depression. And so what this study found is depression prevalence was 42% higher among adults in the lowest quartile of creatine intake compared to adults in the highest quartile of creatine consumption. In comparison, depression prevalence among persons with a low creatine intake mirrors what has been stated in other studies, and that reflects that there is a much higher prevalence of depression in people who consume less than 1 gram of creatine per day. You might be saying, well, what foods are enriched in creatine? Well, we know that breast milk has creatine, red meat has creatine. It's about 5 grams per kilogram, so about 1 gram per pound, roughly, of creatine. Again, so unless you're eating more than a pound of red meat per day, you're at risk for being deficient in this conditionally essential nutrient. Now, you can make creatine, your liver can make creatine from other amino acids, but again, if you're not getting those amino acids that are deficient in a vegan diet, then you may be at risk for creatine deficiency, which could eventually culminate in potentially psychiatric challenges. Okay, so why is this important? Well, it's critical for brain bioenergetics, meaning nutrient partitioning in the brain glucose utilization, brain fatty acid metabolism. Creatine is very important for systems of the body that depend upon a lot of energy, such as working skeletal muscle. Your heart utilizes creatine, as well as the brain. Also, I believe parts of the eye utilize creatine as well. So creatine is continuously replenished through de novo synthesis and diet. A small proportion of creatine's homeostatic load is excreted daily in the urine as creatinine. About 1.6% of daily creatine in your body is excreted. So you're losing that daily. So again, if you've been on a vegan diet for a very long time, you could be at risk for a creatine deficiency, which could compromise exercise performance, recovery, and the like. And so replenishing lost creatine through diet would require an average consumption of about 500 grams of raw meat per day or supplementation. And this is what the scientists say here. And there is evidence to suggest that creatine supplementation, due to its impacts in brain bioenergetics and energy metabolism, can improve memory, both short-term and long-term memory recall, as well as spatial recall. Several studies found in working memory following creatine supplementation, especially in vegetarians. And that's what's interesting. So when you take a vegan or vegetarian and you give them creatine, they notice better memory recall compared to an omnivorous dieter. I'm sure, and I haven't looked at this data particularly, but I would imagine you would see that same improvement in exercise performance related parameters, where if you take a vegan and vegetarian, give them supplemental creatine, they're going to notice a disproportionately greater increase in exercise performance compared to a omnivorous dieter, because they had a deficiency potentially of creatine. And so I think that's interesting, but creatine is a conditionally essential nutrient that is good for brain health. Okay. Now, this was an analysis, a cluster analysis of the Eat Lancet diet study. And this was a study involving some 330 subjects from the UK. And this cluster analysis of this larger study found that vegans and vegetarians were at greater risk for mental health issues. And so this was the sub cluster analysis was published here very recently. Let me just read this to you. And what they say is, cluster analysis identified dietary style characteristics by strong adherence to the Eat Lancet recommendations to limit red meat intake, representing a sixth of the present sample. So again, they clustered the sample into different subgroups. And this group had a lower mean adequacy ratio and did not meet recommended nutrient intake for a large range of different nutrients, protein, zinc, iron, folate, and reported poor mental health and mood related issues. And so there is a need to better optimize nutritional recommendations for individuals that are on a vegan or vegetarian diet for ethical purposes or personal purposes. So I think that's what's quite interesting. So I want to get to your live questions in just a moment. Again, if you're here and you're liking this content, hit that like button. This is not meant to be an anti-plant-based message at all. It's really more of a nuanced conversation for people trying to, for whatever reason, whether it's ethical issues, environmental issues, go on a vegan vegetarian diet, some nutritional considerations they should understand with regards to potential health challenges, okay? So let me pop out the chat and we're going to get to your live questions. Again, thank you for being here. Let's get right into it. Okay, Kyle says, hey, Mike, how many meals a day do you aim for? And do each of them focus on protein, on a specific protein amount? Kyle, great question. You know, on days that I'm physically active, I have 3 to 4 meals. And one of those meals may be raw milk with some whey protein and collagen. The other meals, I have eggs in the morning because we have backyard chickens, maybe with some ferments, some avocado. I mentioned that I have raw dairy, but I also make my own sprouted nut milk from Brazil nuts, almonds, peeling the skin off the almonds. You have a lot of anti-nutrients in the skin of almonds, so I like to peel those, cashews, and then I'll take the remnant material after you filter out the liquid from the blending of the nuts, and I'll use those to make pancakes with. My daughter loves these with eggs in there, and so there's a lot of different things that you can do with cooking with whole foods. But again, when I do have more grains or plant-based foods, I like to prepare them in such a way to minimize the anti-nutrient load and potential anti-nutrients like oxalates and phytates and tannins and the like. Okay. Ellen says, all right, I'm just getting to some of the questions here. Lots of comments. We have folks from Texas in the house. We have folks from Tulsa, Oklahoma, Pennsylvania, Texas here, Connecticut, LA. That is awesome. Atlanta, Georgia. We have Los Angeles. We have Maryland. Okay. All right. Jen says, I had a vegan stepdaughter. At age 26, she dumped my milk and poured it all over meat, eggs, cheese, and butter in the trash. I'm glad I'm not married to her dad anymore. They were both nutty. Yeah, that type of behavior does seem a little bit nutty and irrational to me. Like I said, I would be shocked to see a omnivore going into the grocery store and burning broccoli or taking beets and throwing them. That just seems completely irrational for that. Okay, Donna says, what the best bourbon to take? I had a stroke and I'm on blood pressure and I cholesterol, atorvastatin, and want to get off both. Yeah, so Donna, we can't talk about preventing, treating, or curing or diagnosing any diseases here, but our sister company, Myoscience, has a lot of solutions for you. So I would definitely consider that and read some of the recent customer reviews, the electrolyte sticks, the berberine fasting accelerator, the K2D3, essential fatty nutrients, a lot of great formulations there. Okay, Linda is from East Texas. She's been following the channel for years and she likes the videos. Thank you, Linda, for that. Okay, Jim says, maybe people with depression are more likely to seek vegetarianism. Yeah, Jim, I mean, there could be a direction of causality. Not really sure there. But again, these cluster analysis of larger studies unequivocally show that people who consume a vegan or vegetarian diet are at greater risk for anxiety and depression. And again, the data finding that low creatine intake, low zinc intake, and various micronutrients that are only contained in animal-based and meat-based products in their association with increased prevalence of anxiety, depression, if they are deficient in diet, leads one to suspect that there are specific micronutrients found in omnivorous diets that are helpful when it comes to mental health and well-being. So I appreciate the question, and again, the direction of causality is not totally sussed out, but there are lots and lots of studies showing that a vegan or vegetarian diet may increase one's risk for depression and anxiety. So great question there. All right. Jim says, I have no problem eating pigs that pass away from old age. Yeah, Jim, I'm with you on that. All animals do die. And that's one of the things that a lot of people don't recognize is all animals die. And so if you can give them a really great life while they're here, I think that's what we're all striving for. Holistic Mama says, what is the best time to take glycine? Yeah, I think in the evening time, because glycine has been shown to improve and support GABA. We know that this is an inhibitory neurotransmitter synthesis, and so supporting GABA synthesis might be helpful in improving sleep and sleep quality. So that is helpful. Okay. Great question here. And I love that we have some vegan and vegetarian friends here that are looking for specific. What are the 3 highest yield supplements you'd recommend for vegetarians? Okay, so number 1, I would do vitamin D3 and K2. So if you're not eating a lot of mushrooms or natto or fermented foods on a vegan or vegetarian diet, you should consider D3 and K2 combinations. That would be number 1. Number 2, I would suggest zinc and creatine in combination. I think those 3 would be helpful. If I could sneak a 4th one in there, it would be iodine. So those would be, again, D3 K2 combo, zinc, creatine, and iodine. I think the latter 3, zinc, creatine, iodine. Which one would I prioritize? Probably creatine, only because there's really good evidence to suggest that creatine is just not something that a vegan or vegetarian is going to be getting from the diet, and as well as zinc. And we know that these things are so important. Iodine is very important as well. Okay. Cynthia had another comment. She says, please list what nutrients vegans need to supplement. Yeah, so again, D3K2 combinations. Now, if a vegan is eating a lot of natto and fermented foods, they might be getting sufficient vitamin K2, but we know vitamin K2 is mostly made and present in animal-based products, yogurt and especially fermented products like that. So it is important to acknowledge that you can get that from vegetarian sources as well. But, not too many people are buying natto. I've been to every health food store on the West Coast, and I've never really found natto there. You have to go to special Asian markets to get natto. Zinc is going to be helpful. Again, creatine, 2.5 to 5 grams per day as well. Okay. Kimberly had another question. I'm mostly vegetarian, so this resonates strongly. What would you suggest as a creatine supplement? So there's a lot of creatine supplements out there, but the reason why we promote the Myoscience creatine-containing electrolyte sticks is because we know that electrolytes enhance the absorption of creatine, and we know that creatine is involved in improving cellular hydration and skeletal muscle. So these things work hand in hand together, and so it's a good combination to take these things together. So I do recommend that. Okay, so that's just something that I'll link in the description below. What else do we have? Questions here. Okay, Derek says thanks for this info on mental health and meatless diet. Can you please do a video on dyes in foods if you haven't already? Yeah, I haven't done that. That's a really good one. Why are they banned in other countries but not in the US? Okay, would love to look at that research. I haven't specifically. I know there was some association with red dye and blue dye and autism potentially. So that's important to recognize. The URL or the handle of this commenter says, I worry about the antibiotics and other stuff in meat. You know what? So the risk of antibiotic residues in meats is really overblown. We know that antibiotics can be used in corn-fed cattle, and that's why it's important to get grass-fed cattle. But there are limitations in terms of when antibiotics can be used up until the date of process. So the USDA has a lot of requirements on that, and so these animals have not been given antibiotics prior to processing. So there's a lot of recommendations there. I believe the antibiotics are used a lot more, especially in poultry and pork-type products. Grass-fed cattle don't need a lot of antibiotics because they're eating grass. They're eating what they should be eating. And so if you're eating animal products from animals that are eating foods that they shouldn't be eating, then you shouldn't be eating them either. All right. Doesn't that make sense? These animals, need antibiotics because they're getting infections from eating corn. Animals, cattle don't eat corn on the cob. I don't know if you've been in Indiana or Illinois, where there's cornfields everywhere. You very rarely, or if ever, see cattle just munching on corn on the cob. They're out there eating grass. That's what cattle should be eating. And that's, again, why I don't eat commercial chicken or pork, is because these animals are being fed foods that are not native with what they would normally be eating. Poultry in particular, these commercial chicken, I never eat chicken when I go out. The only chicken products I eat are the eggs that my own chickens, lay, because, backyard chickens are seeing the sun. They're touching dirt. We feed them mealworms. Anytime we go in the compost and churn the compost and there's worms in there, we give it to the chickens. So they're eating diets that chickens normally eat. When you get chicken from the grocery store, they are fed a lot of junk and a lot of garbage, and they have a lot of pre-slaughter stress. Not a big fan of commercial chicken. Okay. NFS says, what are the vitamins, nutrients only found in animal products in reasonable amounts? Yeah, great question. And again, if you would refer to figure 2 here, this is a great summary from O'Keefe and Cordain et al. Omega-3 fats, DHA and EPA, zinc, iodine. We have protein. I think protein's a really big one, obviously, because you're not getting sufficient protein from kale, broccoli, and that sort of thing. You also have iron, B12, folate, vitamin D, and vitamin K2. So those are the big micronutrients that you're not going to be getting on particularly a poorly formulated vegan vegetarian diet. Kimberly says, what creatine supplement and brand? Okay, so I'll be honest, Kimberly, my conflicts of interest. I have a financial interest in Myoscience, but it's the best creatine out there. I'm just going to tell you hands down because of how it's formulated. There's a lot of cheap creatine monohydrate products from China and nothing else in there. No accessory nutrients to enhance the absorption. The electrolyte sticks work really well, really affordable, less than $1 per serving. So that's what I'd recommend. Marco says, I feel great after eating a steak. Really? Yeah, me as well. I do. I get it. And I love cattle too. I love animals. I do. This is a hard part to sort of mentally, navigate this. It's a little mental gymnastics at times because, we all love animals. But, if you give animals a good life, how many extra days do they need to enhance the quality of their life? Animals are, they're sentient beings, of course, and they have feelings and they have thoughts, but it's not like they go to graduations and have grandchildren and, play on all these things. Animals, live day by day, and you don't want to harm them. You don't want to hurt them or torture them. But if you give them a good life and make sure to minimize pre-slaughter stress, like they do at small ranches, like they do in Australia, I think, some of the commercially grown meat here and the big agricultural, products out there, not really, they don't minimize the pre-slaughter stress like they should. And so that's why you see a lot of these viral videos of cattle and pigs being abused and all that. And I certainly do not endorse that nor promote the consumption of foods that have had a lot of pre-slaughter stress. There might be evidence to suggest that consuming foods or animal products that have had a lot of pre-slaughter stress has problems for us. And so I think that's important to consider. Oh, great question here from Rambler. How much of your diet was influenced by Charles Poliquin? Did he live in the same city? He lived in the same state as me. I've known Charles, from 2007 to, I believe he died in 2018. And so Charles, I really like Charles, got to know him very well. And he has influenced a lot of how I think about fitness, nutrition as well. So yeah, great. Great comment. Someone is commenting, a lot of vegetarians and vegans eat things like chips and cookies. And this is what I see at natural food stores, particularly when I'm in Seattle, where I go shopping, is a lot of vegans and vegetarians are just eating processed food that is plant-based. And I think that's the problem, because it requires a more nuanced conversation. Now, Oreo cookies are advertising that they're vegan and vegetarian, which is just not, that's the problem. And this lies and sort of epitomizes the problem with the food industry as a whole. When the ketogenic diet was first emerging in 2015, 2016, in terms of its popularity, we got a lot of momentum on the keto diet. And then the food companies came in and it's keto cupcakes, it's keto treats, it's keto cookies. And it was just a bunch of junk food. And that is particularly problematic, because then a bunch of people were saying, well, it's keto, so it must be healthy. And then they say, I tried the keto diet and it didn't work. But they were eating a lot of ketogenic junk food. And so we see that with veganism. But again, it's hard to have a nuanced conversation with people that are sort of wholesale bought into this idea, and they have a lot of activism behind them. And so this is why, again, nuance matters, context matters. So NFS says, is there a preferred bioavailable form of zinc? Yeah, zinc bisglycinate chelate. Zinc bound to glycine would be the form you always want to think about when you're taking a micronutrient, whether it's zinc, selenium, magnesium. What is that chelated to? Is it glycine? Is it malate? You don't really want oxide or picolinate. These things. They don't offer, the chelating agent should offer some health benefits, and sometimes that doesn't happen. So again, you want to consider the chelating agent. So again, what is the mineral that you're trying to get bound to? Is it picolinate, which has no benefits in the body? Is it oxide? Again, no benefits in the body. Or is it glycinate? We know glycine is an amino acid. It's an essential amino acid. It's favorable. We know that malate is favorable. So we want to consider magnesium malate, magnesium glycinate, zinc glycinate, things like that. Okay, friends, really hope that you enjoyed this live session. Thank you, as always, for being here. Thanks for sharing this video. I love seeing your comments. Thanks to all of you that are here live. These Metabolic Mondays, we're diving into stuff live. This is uncut. I'm not editing any of this, just putting it right here for you. So I'm grateful that you're here. Thanks for hitting the like button. And we will catch you later. One last comment here. What do you think of sucrosomal magnesium zinc? Mohammed, I don't know that particular form. So I think it'd be magnesium bound to sucrose. I'm not really sure. I'll have to check that one out. So thank you for the wonderful comment. And again, have a great week, and we'll catch you all later. Bye now.